It's time!
All right, guys, we are back for another episode of Coach's Corner. This is Joe McDonough, your host. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe_McDonough6. As always, we are presented by MMAprospects.com. Find out tomorrow's stars today at MMAprospects.com. Great team over there, myself included. Today, we're joined by a very special guest. You know, we've had an insane lineup, and I'm very happy to have this coach join that lineup and add to, you know, the Coach's Corner resume, which continues to improve week after week. Over at Elevation Fight Team, the Muay Thai and striking coach, Mr. Sean Madden. Sean, how are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me, Joe. I appreciate being on, man.
Pleasure's all mine. It is always great for myself and, you know, the viewers and everyone listening to learn more from all these different coaches. You know, I ask very similar questions every week and I get very different answers, which is one of my favorite things. You know, makes my job easy and I just get to listen and learn, you know, about the sport that I love. So as you guys know, and those of you that are new, we throw 10 minutes on the clock for each round. The fifth round, more of a hobby-based round outside of MMA, is 5 minutes. So let's throw 10 minutes on the clock and start with round number one. So, you know, some amazing fighters, obviously, at Elevation Fight Team. You know, one's fighting in, 4 days now? Mr.
Yep.
Curtis Blaydes. You know, obviously, you look at Curtis Blaydes' record and resume in the last year, 2 years, and it is a title shot. It is a title shot, but because of how weird the heavyweight division is right now, with, you know, DC and Stipe fighting 3 times, Ngannou's getting the title shot, John Jones is in the waiting. If he is going to fight, who knows? But is this weekend, is there any added pressure on Curtis to have more of a statement win? To kind of show that, hey, I deserve that title shot just as much as a John Jones or, you know, a Stipe Ngannou.
Yeah, you know, I think at the end of the day, you know, given the situation in the division, Curtis is going to go out there and perform the way that Curtis always does. You know, I think, you know, he's very aware of what the title picture looks like. He's aware of the athletes and the fighters that are in front of him in the division, you know, so he's not as concerned about putting on a great performance as he is. It's just about securing a win. You know, he did a great interview this morning too, with Ariel, and said, look, you know, like my job is to go win. You know, my job is not to necessarily stand and put on a spectacular performance. I'm going to do what I'm best at, just like he's always done, you know, and in the meantime, he's just going to continue to rack up wins. And when his time comes, it comes. You know, at the end of the day, when his time comes for the title shot, think about all of the experience that he's going to have leading up to that. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
Yeah, does it suck that he's not getting one right away? Sure. But by the time that time comes around, the amount of fights in the UFC that he's going to have under his belt, the amount of people that he's fought and beaten in the UFC, you know, in my mind, that's going to be what keeps Curtis champion for a long time when he gets that shot.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of bizarre to me that he's only, I believe, 29, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, he seems like such a savvy veteran. I mean, he is a veteran, but to be only 29 in this position, and I like what you said, you know, all the people he's fought, all the cage experience he has at only 29, I mean, that title shot's coming sooner or later.
100%. And man, you look at, you know, the heavyweight division alone, you look at the average age in that division, you know, 29 is a great place to be. Not only just from the age standpoint, but also just the freshness of everyone's body in that division too. You know what I'm saying? Like there's people with significant miles on them, you know, Stipe included up there at the top. So being that young with that much experience is a tremendous advantage for Curtis. And like I said earlier, it's what's going to make him champion for a long time.
Another fighter that I wanted to touch on, you know, a top-ranked UFC fighter is Justin Gaethje. You know, obviously another weird situation in the lightweight division. You know, I personally think Khabib is retired. I think Dana's kind of sitting there praying each night that Khabib's going to wake up the next morning and say, you know what, I'm doing 30-0. I'll fight Gaethje or McGregor or Chandler or whoever, you know. But I don't think it's going to happen. That being said, for Gaethje, is there, because obviously there's a plethora of, you know, I mean, Chandler's there now, Oliveira, all these guys that, you know, and then obviously the McGregor, the Poirier that have always been there. For him, is it title shot or bust, you know, or would he accept some type of, you know, top contender fight that feels like a title fight against like a Michael Chandler or something?
Yeah, I definitely don't think Gaethje's I don't think he's going to turn down a fight that's not a title fight. You know what I'm saying? I think the Chandler fight is a great fight. You know, I know there was a whisper of it a couple of weeks ago of Nate possibly coming back and I talked to Gaethje at practice one day and he's like, I'll fight Nate right now. So for him, yes, he wants the title shot, of course, because that's where the payday is. But he's also willing to take a fight in the meantime too. I think there's too often we see in this sport, especially in the UFC, that waiting is not always the best solution.
Yeah.
The UFC will generally, if you wait, they'll pass you by. So generally speaking, the best option is to stay active and keep your name in that conversation. And Gaethje's definitely willing to do that as long as it's the right opponent and, of course, for the right payday too.
Yeah. And another thing that adds to that weirdness of the situation is now you hear McGregor, is like the Nate Diaz trilogy, is obsessed with it. He's calling Dana, he's, talking to his coach, all that stuff. And as we know, when McGregor wants something, more often than not, it happens. So, does that add to the weight? But it's good to know that Justin Gaethje's kind of just training and he's going to accept a fight at some point for the, the right opponent, right money, and not just kind of wait on the sidelines for that title fight that may not come, because who knows when Khabib will be stripped or anything like that.
Exactly.
And so, another fighter that just had an insane knockout, and I think I loved on Twitter after seeing, him getting his hand raised, because I think it was everyone's feelings watching that. You're just so pumped from that knockout. I mean, just such a great contender, title shot deserving, all of this stuff. But it's against Frankie Edgar, and you see, we've only seen that happen one other time to Frankie Edgar. I mean, something you'd never see, especially in the first round in that fashion. So, as his coach, I'm sure you were pumped, but is there also kind of part of you that was like, Frankie?
Oh, definitely, man. Look, I've known Corey for over a decade now. We've trained together for over a decade, and he's my boy for sure. I didn't even work with him this last fight, but we're very close friends. And I'm always rooting for him no matter what, of course. But like you said, it's Frankie Edgar, right? I've never heard anyone say one bad word about Frankie ever. He's the nicest guy. He's a legend in the sport. So yeah, you see that. And look, even after the fight, the second the fight was over, you saw Corey, he was feeling the same way. When he was getting his hand raised, he was full of emotion too because of what happened there, but at the end of the day, man, this is the fight business, and it's you or him, and it wasn't going to be Corey that night. You know what I'm saying? So Corey does a great job of, at least recently, of being able to kind of compartmentalize that, right? Like, even if Frankie Edgar, or any legend is standing across the cage, on that night, it's not Frankie, it's an opponent who's trying to hurt him, and he's going to make sure he's putting him away. So, not everyone can do that. We've seen that in the sport before too, where people give a little bit too much respect to the opponent standing across the cage and they can't get the job done. So for Corey to be able to push that aside for the time while he was fighting, it shows his kind of mental maturity in the sport. And yeah, he got the job done. So, at the end of the day, we all love Frankie, but it had to be Corey that night.
And how hard is it for certain fighters, and as a coach, not just of Corey, but anyone that you've coached that has gone through this, where you're fighting someone that essentially you've been a fan of for however long before you became or before you got to the UFC and got to this point and all of this stuff? How hard is it to kind of remind yourself this is a person, not a legend or an entity on the other side?
Yeah, it's exactly right, man. That's the difference between fighting the person and then fighting the name associated with that person, right? Mm-hmm. You can do all you want too, but at the end of the day, when you get in that cage, that person standing across from you, it's kind of like the McGregor effect to some extent too, right? Where we saw people experience that for a while, where they were in there fighting against the aura of Conor McGregor, and that just piled on. That was Dustin the first time he fought Conor.
Yep.
So yeah, man, as an athlete and as a fighter, you really have to be able to separate those two and just know that on the other side of the cage, it's a person who's trying to hurt you and who's trained to prepare to hurt you, and you better be on your A game that night. It's difficult for sure, but it can be done, and Corey was a great example of it.
Absolutely. And Corey obviously came out on the right side of that. We got about a minute and a half left in this round. Quickly, what is the deeper division in the UFC right now? 135 and 155. You got a ball in both courts, but what is the deeper division? For me, I think 135. But what do you say?
Yeah, I'm going 135 too. I think also just given the almost kind of the youth of some of the guys at 135, yeah, man, Aljo's been in the game a long time too, but he's just getting to the title shot now. Jan is there now. Corey is there now. There's a bunch of other killers right at the top there.
Font's big fight,
exactly.
Yeah.
So like, I think just the potential for that division to be great again for that much longer because of where those guys stand right now. I'm going with 35. There's all of those guys are monsters. And 55, look, it's a killer's division too. I just think some of those guys are slightly older, and not like heavyweight or anything, but just slightly older. I think 35 has a little bit more promise and a little bit more potential for the coming years.
And I think with 55, another thing that comes to it is, again, like you said, the McGregor effect, kind of picking and choosing who you want. Obviously, Khabib is an unknown. Again, I think retired, but who knows? So I think that adds to it. Where 135, there's plenty of matches that can be made because there's still guys trying to prove themselves in that spot.
Exactly.
And that's going to bring us to the end of round number 1. All right, let's throw 10 minutes on the clock here for round number 2. So, Sean, tell me a little bit about your background. What got you into coaching, into MMA, all of this stuff to the point where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. So originally, I was a fighter. I fought in Muay Thai and kickboxing. So I fought for Lion Fight Muay Thai a couple times back in the day. Glory Kickboxing. I fought on Team USA over in Spain. Once. So I was active as a competitor on the striking side of things. At one point I was working with a couple MMA athletes on their striking as well. So I was kind of doing both at the same time. I got to a point in 2015 where I was working with Bojan Veličković, who at that time was signed to the UFC. And I really started to kind of like invest in him quite a bit. And at the same time, I had a couple injuries that were keeping me from continuing to fight. And so I just kind of made the decision, I think I'm best suited to start to pursue coaching full time. So I started to make that transition 6 years ago or so. And then I really started to kind of dive into coaching full time, and since then, I've just kind of put them in, and this is where I am now. So I still have quite a long ways to go. I'm still relatively young in the game, but I love this, man. I love coaching every day and helping these guys out. Yeah, man. So, Elevation Fight Team started in 2013. So at that time I was fighting for them, and then 2015, like I said, I kind of transitioned over as a coach, so I've been with Elevation for 8 years now since they started, both as an athlete and now as a coach. And man, yeah, it's been great just to see where the team is headed.
Yeah, and something I asked Dean Thomas, another former guest that we've had, was being a fighter versus being a coach. What for you is the more rewarding spot to be in? And Dean Thomas said, "Well, being a coach because I don't get hit." So for you, what is the more rewarding spot to be in?
That's a good answer for sure. Man, they're both equally tough in their own ways. They're both equally rewarding in their own ways too. I always like to say being a fighter requires you to be totally selfish to yourself and make sure you have what you need. Being a coach to these athletes requires you to be totally selfless. We give everything we have, our time, our resources, our money, to be with these guys. As pad holders, we give our body, our shoulders and our elbows and our wrists to get these guys ready for fights. But that feeling of pouring yourself into one of your athletes and giving them everything you have and seeing them come out with their hand raised, man, there's, I would say the only other better feeling to that is getting your hand raised,
Yeah.
So for me, I love coaching. It's fantastic, man. I just love helping other people achieve their dreams, especially in a sport like this that is so tough. The odds are already stacked against you being a fighter. It's just the nature of the job. So I love helping these guys and girls out and helping them achieve, what they set out to do. So coaching for me.
And interesting you said that is, last week we had John Crouch on, and Dean Thomas made the same comment. John Crouch talked about Benson Henderson. Dean Thomas talks about Tyron Woodley, training these guys from essentially, I don't want to say a nobodies, but, amateurs and just make it into the pro ranks and all of that stuff, to then watching them go and win world championships and UFC titles and Bellator titles and all of this stuff. And you've got a couple of guys knocking on the door.
Yeah, man, it's, and Corey's the best example, like I said. So, even the last two fights, I didn't work with Corey. He has his head coach, which is Christian Allen, who's a martial arts genius. He's one of the coaches on the team. And then his training partner, Carrington Banks, and wrestling coach, So he just kind of whittled his coaching staff down to those two guys because he gets what he needs with them. But I'm still close with Corey. If he ever needs me, I'm always there to help him. But, man, like I said, I watched him from day one when he walked in the gym. We started training together. And from day one, he was a mile ahead of me already, and then the gap just got bigger from there, So to be able to watch him make that transition from day one to fighting in the amateurs, kickboxing, amateur MMA, professional MMA, and here we are now close to a world title. It's been really cool, man, and I'm honored just to be a small part in his journey. And look, even from a coach's perspective, selfishly, it's great for me to be able to see that entire timeline,
Yep.
Because when he gets to that world title, we know what it looks like to get to that position, to go from day one to a UFC world champion. And we have that, we have the blueprint per se, and it's different for everyone, but there's a lot of things that can still apply. Success leaves clues. So
I love that. I love the idea of the blueprint behind it. What makes, and this is one of those questions that I ask every time, different gyms, different coaches, but I always get similar but very different answers, and it's very cool. What makes Elevation Fight Team different? Some people have said the culture with their gym. Some people have said the chemistry. Of the hard working, all of that stuff. But what is it for Elevation Fight Team?
Yeah, those are all great answers, and I believe those to be true for most successful gyms. At the end of the day, it's my personal belief that there's nothing really new under the sun in terms of technique. Everyone's teaching the same stuff. It's how you teach it that can make it successful, right? But it's really the group of people that you have in the gym that are training together and trust each other and have each other's backs and support. So the culture that you build at these gyms is so, so important to the success of the place, and we know it from experience. We used to be at the Muscle Farm facility a couple years back, and we had some big names there. TJ was there, Matt Brown was there, Kat Zingano was there. We had a lot of big people there,
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, Muscle Farm was paying those athletes to be there. So they didn't necessarily come there by choice. They probably wanted to be there, but they were getting paid a good amount of money to be there, right? So what we ended up having there was a group of individuals and not a team, right? Yeah. And that is very, very different. Now we have a team. We have people who look out for each other, who care about each other, who push each other. And that, I think, is why the team was so successful last year. So the culture is definitely a big part of it. I think the other thing that really lends to our success at Elevation is that we have a pretty big coaching staff. We have 9 or 10 coaches on staff. We have a handful of striking coaches. We have a handful of grappling coaches, wrestling coaches, strength and conditioning. The athletes get to choose their group of coaches, and it could change from fight to fight if they want it to as well, but the nice thing about that is that everyone gets to kind of find their lane at Elevation Fight Team, right? You see some of these gyms that have one head coach, one grappling coach, one wrestling coach, and shit, you better hope you get along with those guys, otherwise you're in some trouble, if you don't gel with one of the coaches, if one of the athletes doesn't gel with me, they don't have to use me as their coach, so the fact that we have options for the athletes, I think is really, really vital to our success. For example, this weekend, Curtis is fighting, right? He has his coaches, Cody Donovan and Vinny Lopez in his corner, striking coach and grappling coach, right? I'm with Shauna Dobson. I'm her head coach, and we have Valor, her grappling coach here too. We're all coaches on Elevation, but we're working with 2 of our athletes at this event, so we all hang out together. We're all together, but we're all working with this athlete specifically. So I think the variety of coaches we have lends to our success here at Elevation too.
Which is super interesting, and I actually love that. I love that answer, that you kind of get to pick your lane, what works, who you mesh well with. Another question that I had that was super interesting, and I asked, we had Mark Montoya on a couple episodes ago. Obviously, you guys both in Colorado, and I said, is there, I don't want to say a rivalry, but is there a healthy kind of, okay, Factory X just had a huge win, let's go, it's our turn now. And he said it's a very respectful rivalry.
Yeah, 100%. Look, the Factory X is like 4 miles down the same road from our gym. They're right down the street. So I think anytime you have that level of success that close in proximity, there's going to be a natural rivalry, right? And look, there's a lot of guys at Factory X that I'm friends with. You know, I cheer for those guys all the time. Yusuf Dalal, Brandon Royval, all, you know, the Kamosi brothers when they were over there, like all those guys, man, I've known for a long time on the MMA scene, you know, Colorado scene. I've cheered for those guys, you know, regardless of where they are. I don't care about the gym thing. But on the local level, we compete against Factory X all the time. You know, I don't think we have as much at the UFC level, but that's just a matter of time, you know, and maybe just the different weight classes. But man, with them being as good as they are, it forces us to get better too. And I hope we do the same for them. It's the same as like ATT and Hard Knocks 365 down in Florida. You know, at the end of the day, yeah, I have respect for those guys. You know, they put out a fantastic product, and it forces us to evolve and keep getting better. So if we're doing that, then both of us are doing something right. And I think it's great, you know. And look, we have a lot of guys who started at Factory X and now are with us. They have a lot of guys that started with us and now are with them. And that's just the way that the fight game goes. You know, every gym is not for everybody, but it's nice to be able to have two high-level options that are pretty close right down the street.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think that healthy respect for each other, like, you know, I like what you said, where it's, you're rooting for those guys, but now it's like, all right, now we've got to get a big win.
Exactly.
So that brings us to the end of round number 2. Let's catch it for round number 3. All right, 10 minutes on the clock for round number 3. As you guys know, the viewers at home, this is my favorite round. Each week, you know, obviously I work for MMAprospects.com, presented by MMAprospects.com. This is what we love. We love to, you know, hear the coaches' quotes, everything about some of their top prospects, some of the unknown prospects, some of the guys that maybe are still amateurs that they're super excited about, and kind of delve in on these fighters and see them when they come out to be, you know, who they come out to be in 5-10 years down the road, or you know, sooner or later, whatever. So Sean, rattle them off for me.
Yeah, man. You know, we have a ton of them at Elevation, both at the pro level and the amateur level. And honestly, you know, when we won the MMA Junkie Gym of the Year award last year, I really credit it to these guys. You know, of course, the UFC guys are the ones going out and winning the big fights that people are paying attention to. But those guys only get better because they're training with these other guys that people don't know, right? And these are the guys that are pushing our UFC guys to be at the top. So I really feel like the credit goes to them. And yeah, I got a good list here that I wrote down. So I'm gonna go with this guy first, just because it's his birthday today, Carrington Banks. Happy birthday to Carrington. So he's actually he's a pretty high level pro. He was actually on Tough AT versus back in the day. He's with us now. So he was actually just in Usman's corner this past weekend for the title fight. He's in Corey Sandhagen's corner too. I mentioned that earlier. So he had 2 really nice back-to-back wins as a coach this past couple weekends. But he's also still fighting. And man, he is so close to getting into the UFC. I've been trying for a little while to get him in. So he's at 155, which obviously always makes it tough to get into the UFC there. But I'm really hoping that we can get him in soon. So Carrington Banks, lightweight. We have Lavelle Simpson, also at lightweight. He's from Texas. He has a fight coming up with Fury FC down there, and they're doing a great job down there. I believe they just got onto Fight Pass, which is awesome. Yep. He's another one of our lightweights. He's a consistent training partner of Drew Dober and Justin Gaethje and Neil Magny. So keep an eye out for him. Josh Marsh, he's a featherweight, a little bit of a newer pro, but man, a phenomenal striker and also a really slick grappler too. His last fight was a year ago at LFA. He's been out for a little while, but keep an eye out for him. He gives Gaethje some really, really great rounds in the gym. So we're looking for him to have a good breakout year this year. Muhammad Naimov, who actually just fought this past weekend for the Titan FC title. He lost a really close 5-round decision. He fought on Contenders before that. He's a young pro. He came to us not even a year ago. So he's from Tajikistan. Really explosive striker. We just kind of started working on him, so, we're still got some time to put into him, but he's going to be in the UFC at 145 and he's going to be a force when we get there. So great name to keep on the list. Arut Pagosian, another one of our lightweights. He's Armenian. I believe he's maybe 7-3 or 8-3, 8-2, somewhere right around there. We're looking for a fight for him. I just got off the phone with him before this podcast. He's another one of those guys who's right on the door. If we get him one more win, probably he's going to either begin the Contender Series or a short notice call up. And he's super explosive. One of the strongest guys on the team for his weight class. Really good grappler as well, and some great striking. So I'm excited for him. A couple of our newer guys. We have Zach Paunga, who's a light heavyweight. He just had he's 2-0 right now. Both of his wins have come on LFA. He fought January 29th, I want to say, and had a nice finish on LFA. He's going to be out here with Curtis this weekend as a training partner and / corner. So, man, he's a 3-sport pro. He in the NFL. He played professional rugby, and now here he is in professional MMA. Super hard worker, great natural athlete. Man, I'm really excited to see where he goes. He's a light heavyweight. I would love to see him in either PFL, or UFC at some point. He's only has 2 pro fights, but I think if he racks up maybe 3 or 4 more, he's going to be getting a call from one of those organizations soon. And then we have Evan Arredondo, who just made his pro debut last year. He came to us from, I want to say, South Carolina. Just another one of these guys. He's one of Corey's main training partners. Phenomenal grappler, phenomenal striker. He spent a lot of time at some higher level camps, TriStar and Henzo's. He just has a ton of knowledge. Really, really great dude. Hard worker, great training partner. So keep an eye out for Evan. Nufel El Kasri. He is a featherweight. He is an amateur still. I believe he's 4-1 or 5-1 as an amateur. He was a very, very successful kickboxer, and now he's making the transition to MMA. So he is finishing out his amateur career, and then he's going to turn pro. But keep an eye out for him too. So, man, all of these guys, for the most part, kind of right around that 155, 145 range. But we have a ton of names here on this list that are going to be making some waves pretty soon here.
And I love the list, and I have my own list going for everyone that's been named by coaches on every episode, every guest we've had. So I can't wait to add them right after we stop talking, and read more into them and watch some of their fights and stuff. One thing that I noticed when you were talking about all these guys is that main training partner for Curtis Blaydes, main training partner for Corey Sandhagen, main training partner for Justin Gaethje, gives Justin Gaethje trouble. That's not something that most 2-0 or guys outside of the UFC and all this stuff can say, that they're training with a guy like Justin Gaethje who essentially is right there as a world champion, and they're giving him a run for his money in practice every day.
Exactly, man. It's so great for them, and that's why I said winning Gym of the Year comes down to those guys, because those are the ones that are preparing these top level guys for their fights, that are pushing them day in and day out, and they're not getting the recognition, because they're just not at that level yet, but they're the ones really doing a lot of the work. Now, of course, the UFC guys are still going out and winning fights, and they deserve a ton of credit too, but they were in that spot if these guys weren't pushing them day in and day out, so I know it's so tough to be one of these guys who is putting in the same amount of work as the UFC athletes, but it's not getting paid the same amount or even close to that amount. They're not getting the same shine. They're not getting the same luxury of being a UFC fighter. It's what makes this job very tough and unrewarding sometimes. So they deserve as much credit as they can get.
Mm-hmm. And I think back to, one of the previous rounds where you're talking, you said the blueprint, that has to be something that they really buy into, when they're training with guys like Justin Gaethje, Curtis Blaydes, all these UFC, top level title contender, names. And like you said, they're not getting paid like that yet. They're not getting, the notoriety of the name, the all that stuff, the money, but they've seen the blueprint work for those guys and other guys, like you said, a Corey Sandhagen. So they must be really buying in at the gym.
Exactly, man. And we say this all the time. I said it earlier, success leaves clues, right? All these younger guys, all they have to do is watch Corey show up to practice, watch how he trains, watch Justin show up to practice, watch how he trains, watch Curtis, watch Neil, right? Watch Drew Dober, just watch how these guys approach this lifestyle, how they prepare themselves, how they train, how they recover, and chances are if you imitate most of that stuff, you're going to find success, Now, of course, there's always the technical details and stuff like that too. But a lot of it can be done just by looking at these guys and seeing what they're doing and try to mimic that. And you'll find success that way too. And we tell our newer guys and our younger guys, that's a big part of the key right there.
Mm-hmm. And another question that I always ask coaches that is very interesting, getting the responses that are very similar and very different at the same time, is the it factor you see with prospects. When someone walks in the door and you kind of know this guy or this girl is it. This guy or girl has what it takes if they buy in to be a future, UFC fighter, UFC contender, UFC champion. What is it, or what? Because I'm sure it's a bunch of things, but what is some of the biggest clues for you as a coach to say this guy or girl might have it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the big ones for me is just the level of work that they're willing to do, right? If they're willing to do the small, the boring, the repetitive stuff every day that's not fancy, right? That's not sparring, that's not pad work, that where there's not a camera around. If they're willing to do those little things, if you're willing to go hit the bag or work on footwork for an hour without anyone watching, right? Without getting any reward from it, that at least right now, right? It'll pay off in the future. If you're willing to do those things, right? Go put your road work in or whatever it is. I know I'm like, man, this person, we can work with them for sure. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the little things that I really see when it comes down to being a champion that separates them from everyone else is the discipline and the willingness to go the extra mile, So if we can identify that in some of our younger guys, that they have that eagerness to continue to put that work in and do the things that aren't necessarily sexy or flashy, right? Man, that right there goes a long way for sure.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the end of round number 3. Let's put 10 minutes on the clock here for round number 4. All right, 10 minutes on the clock for round number 4. Another thing that you talked about earlier that I had written down for a question, and I'm glad you had mentioned it, is being one of 9, 10, 11 coaches at the gym. A lot of coaches that I've talked to have been either the head coach or one of only 3 coaches, or maybe even one of only 1 coach, like a Dean Thomas who has this kind of his own little thing going right now, or a Tyson Chartier who's one of only 2 coaches with the New England Cartel. What is it like to and speak on the relationship you have with the other coaches, and how are like disagreement? I know you said that certain fighters kind of can pick their lane and have, this is my 2 or 3 coaches. And do you kind of stay out of it then with those fighters, or did you kind of step in and say, I think this could work better?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for any and all setups, there's going to be pros and cons to it, right? If you have one head coach who says, hey, this is how we're doing it, these are my rules, sometimes that works really well because there's just one voice that it's coming from. Sometimes that doesn't work well if you're like, hey, I don't really agree with this, and there's no other option here. On the other side of it, like us, like I said, the benefit is very obvious. You have a lot of options, right? And when our coaching staff is communicating and sharing ideas with each other, it's great. Look at the downside of it that can happen sometimes, and it does happen, right? When we want to make a decision as a team, we have to sit down with 8 coaches, and that's 8 egos that come to the table, right? And sometimes the egos get in the way. Sometimes it takes longer than we would like to make a decision as a team, right? So that can be a tough part of the process. But overall, we've seen more benefit than downside from having that many coaches. So yeah, I think it works well for us in terms of like, if Curtis is working on something, if those coaches bring a question to the rest of the coaches, right? We're always glad to help out. If we say, hey, if I see Cody over there and I say, hey, Cody, I feel like Curtis this might help him, they'll take that advice too, and vice versa, right? If I'm working with Mallory and Cody comes over and says, hey, I would like to see Mallory do this on the ground, I think she could be a little bit more successful with this, we would take that advice 100%, like a big part of that and a big key to that is just being trusting with the other coaches, having a good relationship with them. You've seen it at other gyms before too, where sometimes you can get too many coaches and then all of a sudden it's like, well, this guy's talking to my athlete. Is he trying to take him from me? Right. Yeah. And because that ego gets involved, so it really requires a lot of work on the coaching staff to be communicating with each other and trusting everyone on the staff to make sure that we have the best interest of the athletes in mind too, and look, man, we're human. These things happen to us all the time. We just have to work through them. And we have to make sure that we keep in mind that we assume everyone has the best intentions in mind, and we're here for the athletes. We're not here for ourselves. If we can do those 2 things, we're generally pretty successful with communicating about the athletes or offering advice to an athlete that I don't work with directly.
Yeah. And it seems that not only kind of having that good relationship, but a healthy respect between the coaches, kind of just, knowing that if you put in an input for Curtis Blaydes, it's for the best intentions. It's not to steal him, or it's not to, all that stuff. So it seems like a healthy respect. Another relationship that I always like to talk about is, coaches and managers. Obviously, you're the head coach for Shauna Dobson. She's fighting this weekend. I'm not sure who her management team is, but when you talk with them, is there ever kind of like this, nope, that's not who gets the final say, I guess. And if a fight's brought to the table, and saying like, this isn't for her, or stuff like that.
Sure. I think most of the managers that we work with in general, they're at a certain level where they understand that the coaches make that decision, and they're very professional about it. There's Brian Butler at Sucker Punch. He works with a good number of our guys. Jason House at Iridium. He works with some of our guys. There's Lloyd Pearson, who's now with Gary V Sports Entertainment, who has, Corey, Drew, Curtis, Danny Rubenstein at Ruby Sports has some of our guys. Oren Hodak at KO Sports Reps. That's who Shauna works with. All of these guys have been around the game long enough to know that their lane is management, right? Their job is to present an offer to us, and we'll look at it as a coach and we'll say, yeah, that's good, or no, I don't think that's a great idea, and sometimes even if we say no, it may not work out, but all of those guys give us the option to do that. If that's a red flag anytime for me, if a manager gives us an option and tells us that, we're taking this fight or we're not taking this fight and not giving us an opinion on it,
Yeah.
And like I said, all the guys that I just listed do a fantastic job of presenting us an offer, explaining maybe here's why from a management standpoint that this fight could be good or bad, and then allowing us to make the final say,
Mm-hmm.
That's what I prefer.
Yeah. And I've something popped in my head as you were talking, and I guess this is the round of relationships is, when we talked about the prospects, you had mentioned, you rattled off LFA, all these great regional promotions. That's another relationship as a head coach that you have to have. You have to have a good relationship with these promoters, with LFA. Obviously LFA, is a breeding ground for the UFC, So when you are with, the younger pros and guys still in the kind of regional circuit, let's talk on the relationship you have to have with those promotions.
Yeah, that's huge, man. Especially for a team of our size where we have up and comers all the time, we need a place for those guys to be able to compete on a consistent basis. So you're looking at the LFAs, you're looking at the Titan FCs down in Florida, you're looking at the CFFCs up in the Northeast region, right? All of these shows we need to have access to, so we need to maintain that relationship, So for me as a coach, and for the managers, I do my best to try to stay in touch with those guys on a consistent basis. Mark Bieri, the matchmaker over at LFA, I'm trying to talk to him pretty consistently. Sven Bean, who works for them too, I know him really well, so we talk. But yeah, that's just a relationship that we have to maintain and kind of nurture to make sure that our guys have an opportunity to compete on those shows. And the other part of it too is making sure our guys show up, they make weight, they're professional, and they fulfill their obligations, right? If we're taking fights on those shows and we're not holding up our end of the bargain, they're not going to put us back on the show, So it's on the athletes too to make sure that they're ready for these fights and they're performing at a level to where they want to have our Elevation Fight Team guys back on the show.
Exactly. And that was what I was going to add to that is, when you're bringing guys, I'm sure there's pluses and minuses. When you're bringing guys that go on and have this spectacular performance, they're like, they trust you more, give us the next guy, But if you're bringing a guy who, has missed weight 2 fights in a row, I'm sure they're saying, well, do we want to work with them?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, another thing, obviously, we can't have this episode without talking about COVID for a couple of minutes. Not only dealing with it just in the gym, but as someone, over here, I'm over here in Boston in the Northeast, and I've talked to a bunch of prospects who have said, we had one CES MMA show in the last, year, which was awesome. A lot of fighters actually got to fight, all this stuff, but we haven't seen it back yet. Prospects and having to deal with kind of essentially putting your career on hold. That's the way I've looked at it. But I've also, when I talked to James Krause, he had said, it's also a time to be ready. It's also a time of opportunity. Kevin Kroom, when he made his debut, was just told, pack a bag, And then James Krause called him, said, let's go to the airport. And when he got to the airport, he found out who he was fighting, So just talk about that, the opportunity, and kind of talking to the prospects about kind of being ready.
Yeah, it's exactly right, man. James hit it on the head. Like, yes, there are very few opportunities at the moment. There's more starting to come back now, but no one is fighting on a consistent basis right now. And the last year has proven to us that, especially at the lower level of the sport, even at the higher level of the sport, you're not going to get 8 weeks like we think about getting for a fight camp every single time, or 6 weeks, right? And as tough as it is being a newer guy on the scene, your job is to stay ready to fight, right? So when your coaches call you and say, hey, we have an opportunity this weekend, you're going to say, I'm on weight and I'm ready to go, and it's and that is much easier said than done, right? But it goes back to what I said earlier about doing the little things and doing them well all the time, managing your weight, staying in shape, keeping your mind sharp, right? Staying healthy. So if you really want to make this your career, when that phone call comes, you better be ready to say yes, and if you have to say no because your weight is in a bad place, because you haven't been training hard enough for that fight, man, I don't know what to tell you. You know what I'm saying? Like, these opportunities are fewer and fewer right now, and they're more sporadic. So you better be ready when that phone call comes. That's just the bottom line for it.
And we only have about a half a minute left in the round, but dealing with COVID this last year, what's been the toughest part of, at the gym?
For us, I would say it's the training schedule. We've changed it so many times the last year. The gym may close, it may not close. We have to move to another gym location, so shout out to all of our fighters who have been very fluid with that and understanding, because habit and routine is what people like. And that has definitely not been the case the last year. So being able to adjust to that has been great for everyone.
That brings us to the end of round number 4. Let's catch up for round number 5. All right, so round number 5, we throw 5 minutes up on the clock, more of a hobby-based round. So Sean, tell me about you outside of, former fighter, coach, all this stuff. I'm sure you don't have time for much of it, but, are you a movie person? What are some of the big hobbies for you outside of fighting?
Man, I don't do anything outside of this. My job is, so I work at Easton Training Center, which is a martial arts gym in Colorado. I'm the Muay Thai program director we have 7 locations for that. So that's my full-time job. Elevation Fight Team mostly trains at our East and Denver location. So they're in the same place. Yeah. So I work for Easton, I work for Elevation. They're in the same spot, so that takes up most of my time. Man, whenever the Super Bowl was, I didn't even know it was happening. I didn't know the teams were playing in it. I don't follow any other sports. I hate saying this sometimes, like I don't get to go to the mountains as much as I'd like to. I'm in Colorado. Yeah. It's beautiful. I don't hike. I don't ski. I live and I breathe this stuff, so I have a beautiful girlfriend, Abby. We have a dog, a French bulldog, Humphrey, who's about a year old now. So any of my free time I'm spending with them. I love reading. I do read a lot. But other than that, man, I'm watching MMA fights. I'm watching Muay Thai fights. I'm studying. I'm talking to other coaches. I'm talking to my athletes. I live and I breathe this stuff 24/7 because I have to, really, at the end of the day. I'm only 32. There's all these other guys in this sport, the Tysons, the Henry Hoofs, the Sauds, the Nick Six. Man, I'm chasing all these guys. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I'm not there yet, but I'm going to be. And the way I'm going to get there is by putting my time in. You know what I'm saying? So I'm willing to do this 24/7, and I want to do this 24/7 to get where they are, someday soon. So yeah, it's all good, man. I love doing this. There's nothing else I'd want to do. But unfortunately, I don't have any other hobbies either. So.
Well, you did mention first off, I love that. Second off, you did mention the Super Bowl. So as a Boston fan, even though it was in a Tampa Bay jersey, I have to shout out Tom Brady, the GOAT. But yep. So speaking of GOATs, let's take we've got 3 minutes left on the clock. Let's take the time to who is your Mount Rushmore of MMA, I guess. Who's kind of your top, and you don't have to give me an order and whatnot, but who's your top 4, top 5?
Sure.
MMA, whether it's past, present, anytime, doesn't matter to me, GOATs.
Sure. I'm going to go from lighter weights up to the top here. So we're going to put Mighty Mouse on there, right? For what he did in the UFC, and really just for his dynamic level. He to me was the epitome of a mixed martial artist, not only his mindset and his attitude towards the game, but the way that he competed in all of his skill sets, so he was so well-rounded, man. And anytime I watched him, I was like, man, this is what MMA looks like to me, so he's definitely up there. Of course, Khabib is going to be up there, right? Just for his record, the fact that you can go undefeated, with that level of competition that he faced the last couple of years, and the fashion that he did it in is truly, truly impressive, and amazing. GSP is obviously up there as well. The amount of title defenses that he had and his victories as a champion, and just his martial arts mindset and his approach to the fight game as well. Man, I'm gonna put Anderson Silva up there too. We gotta throw a striker up there. We got some grapplers in there, so we gotta throw a striker up there. But just the way he kind of changed the game, and what he brought to the game, kind of a fresh perspective. And then who else? What is that? Is that 4 right now? We're gonna put John Jones up there too. We're gonna put Jones up there for what he's done. And to be honest, him winning at heavyweight is probably going to kind of complete that. But in my mind, what he's done already is what has solidified his greatness as an MMA athlete. It'll be cool to see him compete at heavyweight, but what he's done already speaks for itself.
It won't hurt his legacy, I think. I completely agree. It can help it, but it won't hurt it.
Exactly.
And I love that you mentioned Khabib. Obviously, I think Khabib's up there in the GOAT conversation. I had a friend, yesterday, say to me, if you look at Khabib's resume, he hasn't really fought that many people. And I said, well, and I like how you said the last couple of years, it's the way he dominated fighters like a Gaethje or a McGregor or, Dustin Poirier, like the way he made them look. That's how impressive it is.
Exactly.
To make those top athletes look like they're on a different level, and they aren't. So that brings us to the end of round number 5 and the end of our show. Sean, thank you very much, man. It was so fun. And like I said, always great to add great coaches to the resume list of this podcast. And I look forward to speaking in the future. And I thank you very much for the time.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on, Joe. And man, thank you for giving myself and other coaches a platform to share our ideas on. I love listening to these just to hear what the other coaches have to think, their insight on stuff, not even from a competition standpoint, but just to hear, this sport is so dynamic and you can look at it from so many angles. So it's great that you guys give the coaches a platform for them to share that on, so we can hear kind of where everyone's coming from. It's really cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love, I always hear fighters interviews, but, that's kind of where the idea came from, is I want to hear from the coaches. I want to hear from the coaches, the managers, that side, and kind of hear, their side of things with those fighters. So I appreciate you guys and everything you do. Thank you very much, Sean. And thank you guys for listening in.